Welcome to another episode of SummitCast. Today we're going to be talking about Afghanistan. How do we get into this mess and where do we go from here? Welcome to the show. We're going to be talking about Afghanistan today, and our guest is Henry Kriegel, who has been working on the Afghanistan issue since the Reagan administration. He has a lot of background and a lot of interesting information to share. So, Henry, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Peter. Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
For sure. I used to be the executive director for the Committee for Free Afghanistan and worked there from 1984 to 1989. And departed from D.C. after the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan. During the course of my time there, I worked with people like Congressman Charlie Wilson of Charlie Wilson's War. I worked with Afghan leadership. I worked with Afghans who came to the U.S. to tell their story to Congress. We provided humanitarian aid into Afghanistan, and we also provided medical relief to wounded children and villagers who could not seek relief in Pakistan or Afghanistan. We brought them to the U.S. for free medical treatment. In addition, during the course of my time there in 1988, April 12th, I did have a meeting with President Ronald Reagan about the endgame in Afghanistan that included key members of his cabinet.
So what's your take on what's happening today?
What's my take on what's happening today? Easily predictable. This war has gone on for over 20 years. We entered that country ostensibly to decimate Al-Qaeda, to decimate the Taliban who provided host to Al-Qaeda, and to get Osama bin Laden. Most of those objectives were accomplished within the first 2 months. We stayed there years longer because we allowed bin Laden to escape Tora Bora. And the Pakistanis harbored him for years. We should have at least declared victory back in, I believe it was 2011, when Osama bin Laden was taken out and withdrawn back then. We have shifted the focus from that initial focus that I just mentioned, those three goals: get the Taliban, get Al-Qaeda, get Osama bin Laden, to nation building, to the war on opium, to women's rights, to gender symposia, to all kinds of crazy notions, well beyond the initial purpose of entering in Afghanistan that we as a nation agreed to. And we've extended this war for 20 years. There has never been a time when Afghanistan really had a central government. We cannot oppose our ideals of democracy or a Republican form of government upon those people who do not want it, nor can we impose our ideals of a democratic society, which has been morphing in our own country, let alone try to export that and have others take it up as their own in order to achieve victory. So it was a failed venture. It's been failed for quite some time. This has been well documented in the Afghanistan papers published by the Washington Post, written by Craig Whitlock, who interviewed top generals, interviewed non-commissioned officers, people in non-governmental agencies who literally worked on the ground. And it was clear that we were losing the war, but that our political and military leadership were lying to the American public about it. And it is a travesty to see what's going on in that country as we seek to withdraw from that nation. I agree, Peter, with the goal of withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's actually way too long for us to have been there already because it serves no national purpose of our own. Yeah. But the way in which it has been done is a tragedy and a travesty that's still unfolding. And it brings a lot of burden to my heart, and a lot of concern, and I'm sure a lot of burden and concern to those who are going to be viewing this presentation.
Yeah, and the tens of thousands of people who were there and with apparently no plan to get them out. It's just unbelievable.
It's this is all very predictable. The Afghan National Security Force were never going to be able to keep it together. They were tethered by U.S. taxpayer dollars, and they attracted some of the lowest of the dregs of the dregs on the whole, with few exception, and that there is no national identity in Afghanistan. It's tribal.
Yeah.
And it's very corrupt. The money that flowed apparently to the Afghan National Security Force flowed to the commanders and to the leaders, but not necessarily down to the soldiers. It is a terrible situation. So the fact that they crumbled and crumbled quickly should have been easily predictable. In fact, it was predictable, but probably ignored. And so it's no surprise that it collapsed that quickly. And hopefully, unlike what happened during the collapse of the Kabul regime under the Soviets, we're talking back now 1990, thereabouts, where it was followed by massive civil war and destruction of the city. And this civil war went on for quite some time, which led to the rise of the Taliban. I'm hoping and praying that this will be at least a better end game than that. But all the visuals that we're seeing of Afghans climbing aboard C-17s desperately trying to get out of the country, or Afghans at the gates of the airport, especially these images of children crying to the soldiers to let them in so they can get out of their country, is really heartbreaking. We hope it doesn't get any worse. It's likely to get worse before this thing is over. But it's really poor planning. Having said all of that, I will champion the decision to withdraw and to stick to that decision to withdraw, because no matter how many years we want to put into it and how much money we want to put into it and the blood and treasure of America, the outcome is not going to change. It's just going to continually bleed us, and there will not be an appreciable difference in the long term. So we had to make that decision, and we had to execute on the decision. We can talk a lot about, how that decision should have been implemented better, planned for better, and implemented better, because you have to have several criteria to justify U.S. intervention in any situation around the world. One is, our national interests have to be at stake. There has to be something very specific that we have an interest in order to invest that kind of resources. Secondly, we have to have a clear vision for victory, a clear strategy for victory. And thirdly, we have to have a strategy for withdrawal that's executable. We didn't have any of those criteria in place, other than initially, which was, as I mentioned earlier, accomplished largely in the first couple of months of the campaign.
Yeah. I guess, what you were talking about with Afghanistan being a tribal society, I guess you saw that when you were working with the Afghans back in the 1980s, right?
Oh, absolutely. They are a tribal society, and very difficult to unite. And let's not also forget that we're not just talking 20 years of U.S. direct involvement since 9/11 in that country. We're also talking the 11 years from 1979 to 1990 that we were involved in it indirectly by supporting the Afghans who were fighting against the Soviets. So now we're talking really cumulatively 31 years of U.S. involvement. Yeah. And during the end of that war, the Soviet war in Afghanistan, it became abundantly clear that we were not going to stay there forever, that we were going to withdraw from that region, that President Reagan wanted to get out of Afghanistan, and he wanted to give Mikhail Gorbachev a face-saving way to get out of that country. Now, Gorbachev had his own interests at stake. He wanted to get a U.S. bailout of their country because it was going to fail economically. And Reagan wanted to secure his epitaph as a peacemaker. And so that's that's where their interests were aligned. So we were going to withdraw from that country. And the Afghan leadership at the time was warned of that. I specifically went over to Peshawar and to the borderlands and met with 5 of the 7 leaders individually to warn them of that and to urge them to determine what their government was going to look like and lead, because we were not going to be there forever. And if they didn't do that, nature abhors a vacuum, and what was going to fill that vacuum was something they were not going to like. Yeah. And I also put this in writing to them and gave it to them in writing. And I was literally in the living room of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was the most radical of the 7 leaders. And I sat there with his people, and there were Kalashnikovs lined all across the living room wall. And it was me and my Afghan medical buddy. Thank God I had him with me. And when I was relaying this message to Gulbuddin in person and in writing, I did that because I felt compelled to do that, because that was my job when I ran the Committee for Free Afghanistan. I invested 6 years of my life working on this issue, and it broke my heart to see it crumble. That it was so predictable that when the U.S. would withdraw its interests from that region, that this region would essentially devolve. Now, when I was in that White House meeting with President Reagan on April 12th, I think the year was 1988, could have been 1987, I warned the president about this because he was going to co-guarantee the UN Geneva Accords in Afghanistan, which spelled the end of our engagement in that region. And I warned him that, first of all, the Afghans didn't like the Accords, but that the region would destabilize further, and there'd be more bloodshed and chaos in that area. And he didn't quite grasp it. He was very amicable. He was very friendly. He was very cordial and respectful, but he didn't agree with me. And that meeting is documented in the Afghanistan diaries, the Reagan diaries, where he noted the meeting and basically said that we didn't know what we were talking about. Well, I was a lot more accurate in terms of the reading than he was. And that region did destabilize because once we got the Soviets out, we had no further interest in that nation, and that the Taliban ultimately and Al-Qaeda filled that void, which led to the rise of a terrorist-backed country.
So what actually happened then? I mean, it was devolved into a civil war, didn't it? And the Taliban was one of the factions, and then you had also like the Northern Alliance, and there were various other factions there.
The 2 principal factions were Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's group, who were largely Pashtun, and they were supported by the Pakistani intelligence. And then you had the Northern Alliance led by Commander Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was a Tajik. The Tajiks were on the societal class in Afghanistan, a lower class, and not respected. They got none of the aid that flowed from the U.S. through Pakistan went to the Northern Alliance. It went to factions like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's. So once the Babra Karmel regime fell, these warring groups came into the city, and it was civil strife. And that led ultimately to the rise of the Taliban to restore, quote, order to the country. And the Taliban were supported by the Pakistani intelligence. And the Taliban were just like kids in madrasas during the Soviet war. They were a lot of them orphans. They were just kids. They were teenagers, but they grew up in war, and they were disciplined. They were even more radical than Hekmatyar. Hekmatyar ultimately joined the Taliban to fight with them, and they instituted a reign of terror within the nation. And now a lot of this has been well documented. One of the best-selling books, it's a historical fiction, but it is based on reality, is The Kite Runner. The Kite Runner does an exceptionally good job of describing the situation in Afghanistan as Kabul fell and what transpired afterwards in an entertaining and an informative way. So I would suggest that people want to know more about how that end game was when the Soviets withdrew. that led ultimately to the Taliban, rise of the Taliban, that book will do the job.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to learn more about like what happened after the Soviet withdrawal and the Soviet war, Charlie Wilson's War is also another great source. The film and the book.
Yeah. One thing I was wondering is in the book Three Cups of Tea, I guess Mortensen is his name, right? The author.
Greg Mortensen. Yes.
Yeah. He talks about that the Saudis were funding the building of mosques and madrasas in Afghanistan to teach a very radical version of Islam. Is that one of the factors that's leading to kind of the radicalization and the Taliban kind of version of Islam?
That's a good point. Greg Mortensen is still based in Bozeman, Montana. Mm-hmm. The point of that is largely true, that when the vacuum was created, and this is well documented in Charlie Wilson's War, once the Soviets withdrew, Charlie, who unfortunately was a proponent of the Geneva Accords in Afghanistan, he and I disagreed on this. Charlie went back to the House Intelligence Committee to get funding for schools in Afghanistan, just one paltry $1 million. And the committee members are shown in the movie, and this is accurate. The movie is largely accurate. The committee basically told Charlie that, don't you know, Charlie, we don't give an F about Afghanistan. They had moved on. So who filled the void? The Saudis were there supporting the Afghan resistance during the Soviet war. I actually met one of these Saudis when I was there with my lawyer friends on one of our missions, and he was an American educated Saudi who would dole out funds and support to the Afghans. Osama bin Laden, obviously, he's Saudi, and they were doing the very same thing. There was a void there, and they decided to fill that void by building the roads and building the hospitals and building the schools and madrasas along the borderland, where they educated the now current leadership of the Taliban and the Taliban as a whole. So that's largely true what Greg was saying.
So the influence of the Saudis and their very kind of fundamentalist radical version of Islam is one of the big strategic issues, it seems to me, in Afghanistan, and one of the reasons you have the problem.
Well, that's one of the reasons why you have a problem. I mean, but the other part of the reason is that this is part of like an entire wave within the Middle East of the whole movement towards a caliphate and this radicalization of Islam. This is just all a part of that.
Yeah. And
back in the day, during the Soviet war, the Afghans didn't really appreciate the influence of the Arabs. Mm-hmm. They saw them as outsiders, and many of them saw them as outsiders, and many of them, at least the ones that I had connection with or indirect connection with, were concerned about their presence in the country and their influence in the country.
But they still took the money.
Well, it depends. It's a mixed bag. Yeah, it's a mixed bag. They took the money. They just rolled. Yeah, they did take money for sure.
So, where do you see things going from here? Like based on, what you know of the people and the tribal nature and so on. Is the Taliban going to be able to, are they going to be running the country, or is it going to devolve into factions again? Like I saw one article about some people had raised the Northern Alliance flag in the north and one of the valleys there. So are they going to break away, or do you think the Taliban will be able to hold it together?
Well, the Taliban apparently, according to the reports that I'm reading, have already pre-negotiated deals with Russia, China, I believe Turkey is involved, in Iran.
Mhm.
So they've got support from neighboring countries, and
Yeah.
those are closer to them. The Northern Alliance, again, largely Tajik, but they did have an alliance beyond that, led by the famous commander Ahmad Shah Massoud's son. He's got a great name, no doubt about that.
Mhm.
He's got the vice president, the former vice president, with him, but they don't have resources, and it's unlikely that they're going to be able to mount up anything that's going to be substantive. I don't really see it. They're pleading for U.S. help. That's not the direction where this nation is going, and it's not something, whereas I really worked very well with Commander Massoud's people back during the day, but that's not something that I personally would support. It's like, we need to get out of this conflict in Afghanistan and these other conflicts throughout the Middle East. We don't need to further engage ourselves in it, again, because we have no national interest at stake. This is their country, and they've got to figure out a way to resolve it. We've done a yeoman's amount of work and invested trillions of dollars there, and the lives of our men and women in uniform. And the more we've invested in it, the worse it's got. And there's no small reason why they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires. We don't want to be a part of that graveyard.
Yeah. The back to the British tried and didn't work out well for them, and then Soviets
didn't work out well for the Soviets.
Yeah.
We'll see how well the Chinese do. They're going to try to get in there and apparently extract minerals from that country, because there are a lot of precious minerals that are used to manufacture batteries that are key for operating electric cars and our devices and so forth. But then again, China has a little bit of a PR problem with these Afghans because of what they're doing to the Uyghurs in their own country. So we'll see how far that goes.
Yeah. One thing that's been in the news is that Taliban leaders have been saying that they're going to be different from last time. They're going to respect women's rights and things like that. So people are, rightfully skeptical. What's your thought about that? Do you think there's any hope that might actually come to pass?
It's a very, very good question, Peter. There's been some words to that effect. And I will say that despite the terrible images of Afghans climbing on C-17 cargo planes and falling off to their death, and some video reports of one woman being killed because she didn't wear a burqa, or these poor young Afghan women crying at the gates of the airport in Kabul, or images of kids being ripped from their families' homes, not images, but videos.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for something better. I haven't seen like massive images of this, or massive numbers of people being mistreated or killed, but I'm also told that there are Taliban that are going door to door rounding up Afghan supporters of the American troops. I don't know to what level that's going on. We'll have to see how it unfolds. If the Taliban want any international support of any kind, they're going to have to try to self-regulate. I don't know if that's even possible. So it's all to be determined. And I can't tell you I don't have any more certitude than that. I really don't have a lot of certitude at this point. It's kind of too early in the game. We're just going to have to see how it goes. I think we need to pray and hope that we can get our Americans out of there.
Yeah, that's obviously the immediate need, isn't it? We have to get the Americans out. I mean, and that's the real, absolutely poor planning about the current situation, that they pulled the troops out before they got the American civilians out. which was just, hard
It's
to.
horrible planning. That also, and giving up Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without even informing the Afghan National Security Forces. I don't know what good that would have done anyway, but apparently the Bagram Air Force Base is a lot more defensible than Kabul. And it would have allowed 2 military transport planes to enter and leave.
Mhm.
But we gave that up.
Yeah.
And we gave up our equipment. So the major need is getting the Americans out, and also to get those Afghans who are properly vetted. It shouldn't be that difficult to vet them because our troops worked with them.
Yeah.
These interpreters, they should know them by now. And to get these people out and their families out who risk their lives over the course of years, get them out of harm's way, because that's the right thing to do.
Well, absolutely. I mean, even apart from it being the right thing to do, just our credibility as a nation, who's going to want to help us in the future if we don't look after the people who helped us now,
Absolutely. Unless, again, desperate people will hold on to desperate hopes. And this has been proven time and time again, where the Americans come in, unfortunately, we make promises and we leave it high and dry.
Yeah.
Leave people high and dry. And it's a tragedy. It should not be.
Yeah. And, how are they? I don't know that anyone has a plan to get all these American civilians out. I mean, we think about the ones in Kabul, and okay, we're telling them, okay, come to the airport, if they've got a way to do that. But then how do the ones in Kandahar or other cities, how do they even get to Kabul? There's been no mention of any plan. So it's really unbelievable. Just unbelievable that we got in this mess without any planning or for contingencies or whatever.
It is unbelievable, and it just adds to the narrative of challenges that we face nationally and otherwise about how unbelievable it has been over the last less than a year.
Yeah,
and it's almost like shock and awe on the American public and on the world as a whole.
Yeah,
to see what radical changes that have occurred in the course of just a very, very short period of time. And I will just say that while we all feel the burden here, you can't help not feel the burden and the tragedy of this thing, that there is always hope. There is always hope for change. And I'm not just saying that. These are not just hollow words.
Yeah.
That things can change. People need to stand up. People need to get more engaged. They need to let their voices be heard. They need to let their legislators know what their thoughts are on these issues that are facing us today. And we need to change things. We're not going to change things by feeling overwhelmed and burdened and hopeless. Every cycle, there's an opportunity. Every election is an opportunity for change.
Yeah. On
a national level, on a local level. And people just need to try to find a way to keep hope alive within themselves, so that we have a fighting chance to turn things around. I know that sounds pretty broad and maybe idealistic, but I do believe that that's very possible.
Well, it's what it's going to take, really, to save the nation, isn't it? People need to get engaged and not just let whoever's in Washington, see them as the savior. Okay, we get the president we like in, and everything's going to be fine, and we can go back to our barbecues. I think we're beyond that now. People need to realize that it all depends on me, and each of us individually have to do what we can to save the nation and to bring it where it needs to be.
Absolutely. I like the fact that people are more involved. There's a lot of information being shared that I get every day. I'm sure you do too. And I'm sure all of you are watching this as well. And that's good. Sharing knowledge and information is a good thing, but it is the first step. It's not a substitute for action. Sending a social media post or a Facebook message or a Telegram message is not a substitute for activism. It's the beginning of activism. The information is it should be geared to help people have a better understanding of the nature of the problem. It should offer some kind of a vision for a victory and a solution. And then you got to act on it. Yeah. And that action can take many different forms. And I'm not here to tell people how to act. I can give lots of different ideas as to how to act. But people need to get into the spirit of activism in order to change it.
Yeah. And that has to be done in a strategic way. To me, we see people marching and protesting in various places around the world about, lockdowns and so on. But, and that's kind of, they feel like they're doing something and they are making a statement, but it needs like a long-term strategy of, how do we bring change in the government? How do we bring change in the structures of government and legislation and so on? So, it's good that people are energized, but then it needs to, as you're saying, it needs to get to the next step of what's the strategy, the long-term strategy to get things where they need to be.
Precisely. Precisely. That is a very good point, Peter, that rallies are great for inspiration. Rallies are sometimes great for a show of force that can influence things in real time. However, they're not the end all of end all. Yet you need structure, you need organization, you need funding, and you need a strategy that is achievable and the practical means to implement a strategy over a long period of time. It takes consistency, it takes stick-to-itiveness, it is a discipline. It's not a one-day event.
Yeah,
I love rallies because they're inspiring. But it's not, again, like sharing Facebook or social media information. It's not the end all of activism. It's the beginning of activism.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, getting back to Afghanistan for a minute, something that kind of maybe is a point of which you can hang some hope on is what you were saying about the Taliban. They were all very young 20 years ago, and they're 20 years older now, and people tend to get less radical as they get older and wiser and, understand more of life. So that's possibly something that could lead them to take a less radical line this time. Also, I think, they can see that taking a very radical line, supporting bin Laden and so on, didn't end up well last time. So they may be looking more to kind of legitimacy as a country this time. And so they may actually, I see a possibility that they could take a different route. And that would be, given the practicalities of the situation, we're not going to get rid of the Taliban overnight, but if the Taliban could be more tolerant of and kind of follow through on the things they're saying, then that would be the best outcome in the short term. It would also be the best way of getting the Americans out, because effectively the US military is very limited in what they can do to get people out. Without the cooperation of the Taliban letting people out, it's going to be pretty much impossible. So we painted ourselves into that corner where we're relying on the Taliban to help us get our people out, which is, how do we get in that mess? But then, I think the best thing we could pray for is that they do take a different line this time.
I think that's very insightful. We did put ourselves in this corner where we're dependent upon I hate to say it, the goodwill of the Taliban, and perhaps the maturity of some of their leadership. Well, this is all to be determined. Yeah. I will say, like I mentioned earlier, it is as painful and as deeply disturbing these videos and images are and reports are of what's going on in instances in Kabul and around the country. It was far worse when Babra Karmel was hanged and dragged through the middle of Kabul, and there was civil war door to door in that capital when the Soviets withdrew. It was far worse then. Yeah. Now, I'm hoping it will not be, and back in that time when the Taliban did take over, they did desecrate women in the Kabul stadium for sport. Yeah. it was barbaric.
Yeah.
So we're not seeing that now, thankfully, and maybe we won't see it. We can hope we won't see that. We can hope that they can exercise some self-discipline. We can also expect to see things that are just horrific in our sense of humanity, like stealing children from their homes and making them child brides and things of that nature, which is kind of the course of action of these people.
Yeah, there's been reports of that already.
Yep.
I guess one of the things that's difficult to know is, how much do they actually have a centralized command structure? And I think it's somewhat decentralized, and local, commanders may be doing what they like and may not be necessarily following orders from Kabul.
That's always a part of it in Afghanistan. However, I would also point out that there are reports that the Taliban have met on a regional level, way in advance of this withdrawal, and formulated plans for takeover, which indicates a certain level of organization and structure and discipline, self-discipline, to make this happen. So yes, Afghanistan has never been a strong centralized nation, it's more tribal. However, there has been a disciplined approach on their part, waiting it out. Remember, they did not go after Americans. There hasn't been a single U.S. casualty in Afghanistan since March of 2020. That's a long period of time. When you look at what goes on in the cities of Chicago, where there's multiple murders over a weekend, not a single U.S. soldier had been killed in over a year in that country because the Taliban exercised restraint, knowing that we'd be getting out.
Well, so, that was like a negotiated deal, wasn't it, that the Trump administration had with the Taliban?
Yes, there was a negotiated deal. However, and they kept to it.
So the fact that they kept to it is a good sign. It shows there is
for sure
discipline down the ranks. There weren't local people going off and saying they didn't like the deal and shooting Americans.
Yeah, so, there was some discipline.
Does the Taliban does that transcend the tribal boundaries?
Largely Pashtun, these guys. So I don't know how far it will transcend. I don't know if there's any willingness to go beyond that. We'll see. They're largely Pashtun. So, and they're Pakistani backed, who are also Pashtun. That's the connection. So the thing up in the Northern Alliance, we'll see where that ultimately goes. There might be pockets of resistance there. It's very difficult to get to the Hindu Kush because it's mountainous. Commander Massoud survived 8 or 9 direct Soviet assaults on his region, and they could never get him.
Yeah,
he was taken out 2 days before 9/11 by Al-Qaeda terrorists posing as journalists.
Yeah. The start of that was the start of the 9/11 attack, was really taking out Massoud, wasn't it?
2 days before it, for sure.
And
because they knew that Massoud knew where the Al-Qaeda were located and where the Taliban were located in Afghanistan, and was the only effective resistance force to the Taliban during that time of austerity and reign of terror.
Okay, I was wondering why they did that. So that it was basically they could see that if they attacked America would go after them, and Massoud was their obvious ally. Is that what it was, taking out?
That's the way I read it, and I read it. They went after him because he would have been a natural ally of ours. And oddly enough, just for perspective, during the Soviet war, Massoud's people would they got no indirect aid from the U.S. through Pakistan, and they pleaded for help from the West. We couldn't give him a dime. We didn't give him a dime. He had to negotiate arms from other tribes and interdict Soviet convoys to get his weapons and so forth. But afterwards, they build a multi-million-dollar mausoleum for the guy, and he's extolled as a hero. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah,
just so bizarre.
What was your take on Massoud? Was he a good guy?
I believe he was a good guy for sure. And I believe we worked very closely with some of his key people. Masood Khalili, who was sitting with Masood. They were reading Rumi, the poet, the night before the so-called journalist took him out, or tried to take Khalili out. Masood Khalili was in our offices maybe 2-3 times a year. Maybe I'm overstating it, but often. Tahir Mayar, Muhammad Asak, all these guys were in my offices quite often and visiting and working with us. And they respected people of different faiths. They knew I was born Jewish. They didn't care because I was a person of the book. I was a people of the book.
Yeah.
And we worked well with them. They were devout. They were loyal. They treated women well. Women were nurses and educators in their region. They worked very well with the French. They were closest allies. But we, for strategic reasons, gave arms to the Afghans through the Pakistani intelligence services, who were Pashtun and aligned with more of the radical elements in Afghanistan. So he was kind of the odd guy out. But he was the most effective fighting force in Afghanistan during the Soviet war. Now, we also worked with other factions that were more westernized because they could communicate well with us, but they had very little presence and credibility on the ground in terms of military. NIFA, National Islamic Front of Afghanistan. They were very well educated guys, and there were others we worked with.
Politics, though, is that right, rather than military action?
Right, exactly.
Just hearing you talk, you can see that America helped create this by really backing the wrong side back then. Instead of backing Masood and people who could have had a more moderate, and Western aligned, maybe Afghanistan, or at least not the kind of extreme radicalism of the Taliban. We allowed, we backed the people, who in the long term, and it turned out really badly. We did it for short-term political reasons. That's something I see America do a lot in international situations. We look short-term rather than long-term, and we're not principled in what we do.
Yes, a lot of this was motivated by getting back at the Soviets, and that was a large motivation for many involved. And the condition for that President Zia and Pakistan had for our involvement in that region was the aid had to flow through them, and we agreed to that condition. So the aid did flow from the U.S. to Pakistan, largely to the Afghans. The CIA did its own operations too, outside of that, limited, but that's how generally it worked. And again, once we achieved our goal of defeating the Soviets in Afghanistan, we hightailed out of there.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we should have stayed there long term, but to leave that vacuum when all these people knew were war, and we had kids that all they knew in their life was war. They were fodder for radicalization. We didn't provide any path forward, any sense of support for economic development or anything like that. And I'm not saying we should have stayed there and help build their nation, but to just get up and leave and take our intelligence assets and just book on them, well, they found other sources of support.
Yeah, the vacuum was filled.
Yep.
So, Henry, any final words before we wrap up? Final thoughts?
Any final words? Yes. I would just say this. It looks bad, and it is bad. This withdrawal is flawed. It's not executed well. It's unfortunate that it's come down to this. But I will say that the decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan is the right decision, that it should be the beginning of a new foreign policy of restraint and realism, where America does not engage in conflicts where there is no national interest at stake, where there is no sense or strategy for victory, and where there is no realistic plan to withdraw once our goals have been achieved. We have to end our involvement in places like Afghanistan and throughout the Middle East, because it is not serving our national interest. These are not our engagements to be involved in. So yes, it is difficult and painful to watch this thing unfold, but I will say that this current administration at least is holding firm to getting us out of the country. And I think that's good. And we can continue to look at how we're doing it, how effective and ineffective, so that these mistakes will never be made again, and that those who were involved in these missteps are held accountable. But right now, the focus should be getting us out of Afghanistan, our troops out, getting our people out, getting those Afghans properly vetted who supported us out of that country, and getting us to a more sane and realistic foreign policy where we look after our interests first.
Okay. Thank you very much, Henry. Really appreciate your expertise and knowledge of this subject. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me today.
And we'll see you next time on SummitCast.